Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Literacy Podcast. Melissa and Lori love literacy. We are here with someone very special today from the Reading League, which if you're not sure what the Reading League is, it's a national education nonprofit led by educators and reading experts. They are dedicated to promoting knowledge to really support the future of literacy education. And I like the way their website says it, so I'm just going to read it. Accelerate the global movement toward reading instruction rooted in science. Melissa, how powerful is that?
Yeah, I love the Reading League. I love Laura's podcast. I love listening to her podcast. I love their courses that I'm excited to take. So there's just so much good stuff coming out of the Reading League around the science of reading. And I just love how they are they're like, we're all in this together. Let's let's move this work ahead. So I'm really excited to talk to Laura today.
Oh, great. Yeah. So Laura, welcome to the podcast. You're one of the pioneers from the Reading League. Welcome and tell us about yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just really delighted to be here, and thanks for those kind things that you said about the Reading League. Yes, so the Reading League is a relatively new organization, but it's really gained traction out there, and I think it is because of what you said, what it's, our mission and this ethos that we're all in this together. So I've been with the Reading League for about a year and a half as their national director, and my role is really about kind of expanding us through state chapters, for example, and through networking with other organizations around the country, and in doing things like this podcast to kind of elevate the profile of the Reading League, and also really until COVID, traveling to conferences and that type of thing to just kind of help people understand who we are and what we do. And I've been in education for a really long time. I've been in education for, well, I don't even want to say, I'll just say it's been a long time. I am a woman of a certain age. But it's been a really, when I reflect back, it's been an incredibly rewarding career, really. I started out as a teacher, and I moved into administration, and I moved into staff development. And I've had opportunities to really travel the country and internationally speaking on high quality reading instruction and what does that look like. And also, I've had an opportunity to work in the business world. I was the vice president of professional development for a nonprofit called the Roland Reading Foundation. I was the chief academic officer for professional development at the Highlights Education Group. I'm guessing your listeners probably know Highlights. Everybody knows Highlights.
Oh, yeah, Highlights is pretty famous.
Yeah, Timber Toes or Goofus and Gallant. I always say, if you've ever been in a pediatrician's office, so those were, I've just had opportunities to work in kind of different fields and different arenas, but my true love and my true passion is early literacy. And I always kind of think about what I want to do is play whatever role I can to advance this understanding of evidence-aligned instruction that can really make a difference for our students and can help our students become literate citizens of the 21st century, right? Not just to be competent readers and writers, but to thrive and to flourish and to live a literate life, to just be able to flourish in a literate life. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. I mean, I feel like that's so comprehensive. Like a literate life is not just about sitting and reading a book. It's much more than that. And so we want to open those doors for all students.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for being here. We are honored that you're taking the time to talk with us. I'm always a little bit starstruck by our guests, and I'm like, oh, we get to talk to the Reading League today. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. No, it's just it's really a pleasure to be here. Well, I love your podcast too.
Thank you. We'll give you time.
You're very genuine. You're very authentic, and I really appreciate that about you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We just try to be ourselves, and Nothing fancy.
Couple of chicks sitting around talking.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about, let's start with the Reading League. What do you do there? And how does the mission that I shared earlier and that you shared a little bit about play into everything that you do at the Reading League? Like for those listeners who are listening and have either never heard of the Reading League or maybe just heard it mentioned, tell us about the impact that you're having on literacy education.
Right. So it's very exciting. And I think I mentioned this, just a few minutes ago, how really, the Reading League has really become a preeminent organization in advancing evidence-aligned instruction. And we do this in several ways. One of the ways is, like I talked about, is this, kind of moving into the national sphere and becoming a go-to organization for people who are interested in evidence-aligned instruction. And I mentioned the part that I'm playing in that. We also offer professional development. And, when COVID hit, we kind of pivoted and developed an online academy, which is designed to have knowledge blocks to really build teachers' knowledge in foundational understanding of the science of reading, phonemic awareness, dyslexia, and there's other phonics, there's other knowledge blocks being built. And the idea behind that is that, kind of block by block, teachers can build their understanding of evidence-aligned instruction. And these are very special, this online academy, because they're, 2.5 hour blocks, which is very palatable, in a virtual environment, but they're small groups. So the design is not to have just, information relayed, but to have knowledge built. So that's part of what we do. We also have professional development engagements with different districts where, again, until COVID, the work was being done in schools, but now it's being done virtually. And that includes, this idea that it takes years really to transform practice. And we have to, kind of start by looking at where we are now. Where do we want to be? What's our data say? Where do we want to be? How do we build teachers' understanding and knowledge about those best practices? And then how do we implement those? And then continually cycle back and, check what we're doing, check it against the data. So that kind of support, over time is something that we are really committed to. We have a TV show that's going to launch. I don't know if you saw that on social media, but we have a
that's
TV
fun.
show. Yes, it's called Dusty and Dot, and it's just this lovely, charming duo. Dot is a young lady, and Dusty's her dog friend, and it's really about it's a children's show to build kind of alphabetic knowledge, and it's going to be lovely. The other thing we're really trying to do right now is help support this universal understanding around the science of reading. We've seen, and I'm sure you see this as well, that as this phrase, the science of reading, becomes more elevated in the public sphere, and thank goodness, right, for people like Emily Hanford, who have really elevated the conversation. And thank goodness for the podcasts like yours and mine and others, that are getting out there and really spreading this knowledge. But we also see when that happens, a couple of things could possibly happen when it becomes, more of a buzz, is that people may start kind of conscripting it, right, and labeling products with, we do the science of reading.
Oh,
right?
yes.
We see
just
that
like
a lot.
that reminds me of back in the day where everything, I still think everything is labeled Common Core line. Research based. I'm like, what does all that mean?
Right? Well, and I remember back when everything was stamped, 5 essential elements.
Yes,
that's a big thing. Then it was Common Core State Standards aligned. Now it's we're science of reading. And I saw some packaging the other day, and it said explicit systematic instruction, and I'm like, no, you're really not. Kind of want to take a Sharpie and cross that out.
Yeah.
But
so we have to learn to be critical consumers.
We do, and I think that's a really great point. It's all about, and that's why we at the Reading League are so devoted to knowledge building. We're not going to give you a list of programs, for example, that are buy these programs or don't buy these programs. What we really want to do is build your understanding so that when it comes time to choosing resources, you are equipped. And to that end, we have, for example, on our website, we have a consumer's guide, a criterion checklist that people can use when they're looking at programs. But even broader than that, what we're trying to do is develop this, we're calling it a defining movement. And we're saying, look, the science of reading is a buzzword. It's out there. People are jumping all over it. But let's arrive at a common definition. And so we have a website, which is whatisthescienceofreading.org, which I encourage everybody to go on. And please just sign up to join the movement. It doesn't cost you anything. No. It's just join the movement and say, yeah, I'm committed to this. And then start using, the definition. And what we've tried to do is distill this down into a very, short, understandable definition. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. That's it, right, for the definition. And then we go into the rationale behind it. What are the multiple fields of research? And then every month we're going to layer onto that. So I encourage people to check it out. We have a preamble that basically says this is what we believe. We believe in a future where the collective focus on applying the science of reading through teacher and leader preparation, classroom application, and community engagement will elevate and transform every community, every nation through the power of literacy. It's beautifully, beautifully done. I wanted to mention, too, that this wasn't something that we did just kind of, sitting in the Reading League, offices. We brought together stakeholders from other nonprofits, from the business world, from higher ed, from the ranks of teachers, from administrators. So this has really truly been a partnered effort to get this definition out. And so that's part of what we're doing right now too, is just say, look, let's rally behind this. Let's rally behind this. Mm-hmm.
Laura, I know you can't give us all of the knowledge about this on our short podcast today, but I'm wondering, I have in my head from one of Emily Hanford's podcasts where someone said, well, your science is not my science, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, if you could give a very brief recap of what does that mean to be, the science, evidence-based or the science? Mm-hmm. What are we talking about there?
Right. So I think, one of the things that I always reflect back on is that when people say, well, it's your science and, not my science, I always go back to, okay, well, what's required, right, to call yourself scientifically based? And so I think we have to look at, the studies. Are the studies experimental or are they quasi-experimental? Is there a replication of the study? Is the publication of the study in a peer-reviewed journal? And one of the things that I find is that we in education, I think about myself in my undergraduate program, I didn't have any coursework in this, in understanding what makes high-quality research and what isn't. And so if we as educators can understand the required components to be in a high quality study, that's going to help us weed out what we call scientifically aligned or scientifically based and not. And, when I share with teachers, a lot of times I just pull out this, I'm sure y'all have seen this. I think it's right here somewhere. Oh shoot, I can't find it right now. But it's the Stanovich guide, which is using research and reason in education. I think we've all seen that, and I use it quite a bit. It's basically kind of a go-to guide. Sorry, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Okay.
It's always when you need it, right?
Yeah, right. It's called Using Research and Reason in Education. It was published back in 2003. But it's basically how teachers can use scientifically based research to make curricular and instructional decisions. It's a downloadable resource. It's very handy. We have a link to it on our website in our resources tab. And it's very understandable, again, for those of us, when we came up in our teacher prep program, we didn't have an understanding of, quasi-experiment or, replicable studies, peer-reviewed, sample size, all those things that really help us weed through what is the science? Does that kind of give you an
It
idea of what
resonates,
I'm?
yes.
Okay, yeah, good. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought it would for sure. Mm-hmm.
And so, follow-up question to that, I'm wondering, like, what kinds of, over the years, Lara, what have you seen? What kinds of things in classrooms have you seen change based on the science? Like things that we thought were the right way to teach
Yeah,
reading,
right.
that now we're like, well, actually, there's no science behind that. So
Yeah, right.
maybe we
Well,
need to change our mind.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, Laura.
Oh, no, I agree. That's what I was thinking too, is there are so many like things out there. And I remember being in undergrad and even in my master's program and just feeling very confused because there was so much to consume. And I struggled to know what was reliable and what wasn't reliable. And I think I struggle with the fact that it's taken me over half of my career to figure out what is reliable and what's not reliable. And I just feel sad and about all the kids that I impacted in the interim before I knew better. But I do think that there's a way that we can do this sooner, obviously with teacher prep programs, but there are a massive number of teachers out there in the force now, and how we can impact them. But I'm curious as to what you're thinking in terms of that.
Yeah, no, and what you just said is really so true. I mean, I hear that from teachers all the time. Why didn't I know this? And I feel so guilty because of all the kids I've taught, and I've taught them in ways that aren't the most effective ways to teach them. And so the first thing I think we have to remember is, and this is from an article that was in Ed Week, I don't know, almost 2 years ago. It's, this is a no blame, no shame zone, right? We just have, and the authors of this article said, we just have unfinished work around literacy. So I think that's the first thing we all have to remember, that the majority of us weren't taught this in our teacher preparation program, right? So we have to kind of let go of that and move forward from there. And so when you ask, what do I see or what do I hear from teachers? Part of that is, this kind of regret, why didn't I know this? The other thing that I think is important to remember is that, the science of reading is not, an ideology. It's not a fad. It's not a political agenda. It's not a specific component like phonics. It's this body of evidence that really can point the way for instruction. And if I remember that, then actually it's very empowering because it becomes the litmus test for the choices I make in the classroom every day. Am I going to do this or am I going to do that? And when I think about online teaching or hybrid teaching, the laser focus, that we have to have, especially in a virtual environment, in terms of what we teach or don't.
I know.
We have to be very, very laser focused. And so this body of evidence actually, I believe, is really empowering because it helps us create that, that kind of, what do we know? And what does it point us to do? Now, I will say though that one of the hardest things for practitioners to do is give up practices that may not fit within that evidence-aligned, category. And the reason that's hard, I think, and I understand this completely, is because, teachers have practices that they love and that they cherish and that they've seen work with kids. So a lot of times what we try to think about is, okay, you're right. This is something you feel comfortable with. You've done it for years and it has worked for kids, but it hasn't cast the widest swath around the most number of children. And does it have the highest utility? So I think that's one of the things that we're always, asking ourselves. So, what we're trying to do is really say, what do we know at the Reading League? What do we know? How can we elevate that? And how can we translate that to practice? And I do think, one of the most kind of intractable, I guess I would say, methodologies has been the balanced literacy model. And because, who balance, that sounds great, doesn't it? Who doesn't like balance?
Sounds lovely.
A balanced diet, right? That's a good thing, right? So, but I think, again, we have to just examine the organization of our practice, the lessons that we deliver, the methodology that we use and say, well, is this aligned with the evidence? Because if not, it's probably not the highest utility practice that's casting the widest swath around the most number of children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about that a bit with the Right to Read Project gals on a previous podcast.
Yes.
And they shared, really 95 to 98% of students can learn to read when we use science of reading, evidence-based practices. And of course, that would mean that we would have the materials, the high quality materials, and that would mean that we have the high quality professional learning to go along with that. So, just putting all of that out there as the caveat, but I love how you're saying that as cast the widest net, because I think that it's easy to say, well, these kids are getting it. And then what is going on with these other kids? But it's not the kids. And, I think that that's where it's so hard to turn inward and see that it really is a change of practice in an adult action and in lots of adult actions that are asking to happen. So
I agree. And I kind of call it the promise and the peril, right? The promise is that we can teach virtually all of our kids to read. The peril is that it does cause us, like you said, to look inward, because if something's not working, we kind of have two choices. Either it's not working because we have to own that and we have to change instruction, or we blame the kids. And that's not okay. We can't do that. We can't blame we can't blame the clientele, right? Right. So, we have to think about, okay, what can I do differently? And I think part of it has been, it's a change in focus. A lot of, we're very focused at the Reading League on helping all teachers and say, these practices, these explicit systematic practices aren't just for tier 2 and tier 3. This is for tier 1, right? And so let's think about, we're not going to wait for failure. We're not going to wait for kids to fail and then deliver this type of instruction. We're going to deliver this instruction to everybody, knowing that, yes, there will be some kids who need more repetition, more intensity, more time, more focus. But how do we look at a preventative model rather than an intervention model? And I always just tell my own story, because I think stories matter. I really do.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so
thank you for naming that too. It is tier 1, and
yes, yeah,
it's the baseline. It should be the baseline. Like that's what kids deserve. And so let's start giving them what they deserve on the first go round, rather than waiting for them to fail and then trying to give them what they deserve in a way that's remediation, or they're already struggling. So let's get them going. Tell us your story though. I'm excited.
I was just going to say, I always tell my own story because, again, I've been this a long time, so I can tell my, my fall stories. Took a big fall. But I think it's a mind shift, right? Because I know that when I first started out as a teacher, I thought, here's what we're going to do. Here's the instruction, right? And it's just natural that some of the kids aren't going to get it. It's just normal. Some of the kids aren't going to get it. And they're going to go, and I hate to even admit this, but they're going to go somewhere else to get it. Somebody's going to take them into the remediation room or whatever it might be, some specialist who knows way more than I do, is going to take them somewhere and fill those gaps. So that thinking was, I could say this, it was not right thinking on my part. What I also realized that I didn't know is I didn't understand, how do children learn to read, right? I think I taught around reading. I taught activities around reading, but I didn't teach children to read. And I think that requires us to understand, and we know so much more, right? And that's a part of this whole evidence base, from the neuroscience especially. We know this predictable progression of development that kids go through as readers. So as a teacher, if I understand that, then I can support an instructional methodology and sequence and system that matches that and leads it along, right? Instruction guides the development along. And how do we then make sure that our teachers are getting that understanding? And when we do that at the in-service level, teachers go, what? So how do we do that at the pre-service level? So that teachers come out of teacher preparation programs saying, I understand the process of learning to read, and I understand instruction that is going to support that process.
Yeah, we bring this up all the time. Why didn't we learn this in undergrad? Why didn't we learn this in our master's program? And why is it still not being taught in those places?
Yeah.
I know you don't have the answer to that, Laura.
I do have ideas, but I will say we need to quit beating ourselves up over that, right? Because one of the things that I think is really important is that, that Maya Angelou phrase, when we know better, we do better.
Yep.
I think that's really important. You don't know what you don't know. So when you know something, you change your actions. And that applies to life in general, right?
Yeah, and I think too, like what it makes me think of is when I learned about the science of reading and the pieces started to come together like a puzzle. In hindsight, I really was open to learning, and I didn't make an excuse. I acknowledged that I didn't learn it in college. I acknowledged that I didn't learn it as in my master's program. I acknowledged that I didn't learn it when I went through my Admin 1 program to become a school leader. So right there, totaling about 10 years of schooling over the course of, doing all of that work. I acknowledged it, but I didn't let that stop me as an excuse. And I think that that's the important thing is like all of us are here because we're like, it's not an excuse. And, I think that the teachers and the administrators listening are listening to this podcast because they want to learn. I know that's why I listen to podcasts, to be entertained, to learn. But I hope that, in their journey, they're also finding kind of solace in the fact that we're all in this together. We're all knowing better and doing better, and we're not using it as an excuse. And that's what I think the powerful part is that we're putting our stake in the ground and we're saying, hey, this is the science. We know better and we're going to do it. And that, I feel like it's so empowering. It's an empowering step versus a hindering step.
I totally agree. It really is. And I think we have, one thing I try to do is just acknowledge where people are, right? And kind of help meet people where they are, because that was what was helpful to me in my own journey, in my whole career in education, having people that meet me where I am and mentor me along and support me on my growth steps. That's what I think is important. And what you mentioned is right on. There is a support network out there now, which I think is really, really empowering. I was going to mention too, I came up during the years where it was all whole language. And this was pre-balanced literacy, right? It was all whole language. And, and so that was what I knew. And I really embraced that because it's what I was taught. And it's also kind of was my experience. I'm one of those, I was one of those children that I don't remember explicitly learning how to read. It just kind of, I think, happened over time through immersion and modeling and experience.
So you were one of the lucky ones.
I was one of the lucky ones, but and that made sense to me, right? So I had to, again, have a shift, and my shift really came when I started really working in school districts where we had a lot of students who were falling through the cracks, and this was a crisis because, again, you can't just blame the clientele. You can't say, oh gosh, well, we have 80% of our kids not reading at grade level. Must be their problem. Must be their fault. Must be the parents' fault. Must be, pick one, blame them. So really wrestling that to the ground, I think is critically important. And that's what we as teachers do, right? I mean, we all have this. We all have the goal, of student success and student thriving and student flourishing. And so how do we wrestle that really to the ground? And that takes a bit of, I'm going to tell you what it takes. So I had the pleasure of having a conversation with Parker Palmer in my podcast. And he said, there's an intersection between chutzpah and humility. And I'm like, teaching has to be the intersection between chutzpah and humility.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And true.
Absolutely.
So true. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking too, Laura, about, I mean, you just reminded me of, so many things I used to do when I was teaching, where I taught secondary, but middle school. And, I was trying to make a really lovely environment for my kids where they just loved to read, and getting all these books for them that they loved. And like, that was going to be my way to get them right to, and most of them were, behind grade level, probably struggling with fluency still, probably struggling some still with even decoding.
Yeah.
But that's all I knew, was to like get them to love reading.
Yeah.
And I'm,
Yeah, Melissa, and God bless you, because I'm sure if you were working with middle school and high school with children, that think about those students had cycle upon cycle upon cycle upon cycle of failure, which, I always say failure eats bandwidth. So the longer we let this failure go on, the less cognitive, space really that they have to kind of deal with that. But that was kind of the way, like I think about, again, my whole language upbringing was really about, okay, if I just immerse them in print, let them explore, model my own reading behaviors, that this is somehow going to magically happen.
Yeah. I remember that. I taught high school my first 2 years of teaching. And then I went back and taught elementary, because I was like, what is going on at the elementary level? Like, kids can't read. And
what are you doing down there?
What's going on? So I went down and taught elementary. But I remember sitting in second grade in high school, it didn't matter, holding a book and modeling me reading. And I was like, oh my gosh, how silly that's what I thought would. Yeah, I mean, but that was what we did. So I'm wondering, how can practice transform belief systems? And one of what is making me think about all of this, and in our pre-call, I really had thought about that question in terms of just teachers or just leaders. But now I'm thinking about it in terms, after this conversation with you, Laura, of students as well. Because as you said, like students in middle and high school, their belief system is that they can't learn to read, that they're bad readers, because those are the experiences and practices that they've had over time. So I'm curious, how can practice transform belief systems for really all of the stakeholders involved?
Yeah. And I do, when I first came into the work in staff development and the work around, evidence-based practices, it was really around the National Reading Panel time. And I did have this, I think I held this belief myself, that we had to transform belief in order to transform practice. But what I've really come to understand is practice in itself can transform an underlying belief. And many of us need that practice to show us with our students how powerful a particular methodology or an instructional approach can be. So that's where, and I think we mentioned this earlier, that's where stories really come into play. One of the most powerful things is when a teacher can have a safe place in which to talk through all this, right? But hear other people's stories about success and about transformation. And when the person who talks about her own transformation can have that, humility to say, this is where I was, this is where I am now, but look at what it did for my students. So sharing those stories, and that's why, a podcast like yours is really important, because we're sharing those stories. The other thing I was going to say about, when I used to think that we had to change our belief system in order to really transform our practice, there's too much of an urgency to wait for that, right? Yeah. I mean, sometimes I just say to teachers, if this feels like the elephant, just bite off a piece. I mean, that's really what you need to do is bite off a piece of the elephant. And when we can help you do that, that's where Reading League support and support from other organizations can really help do that. The one disconnect that I see quite a bit is, even if a teacher has built her knowledge base, if she goes back into her school or back into her district and they are using a resource or a program or a curriculum that doesn't align with that knowledge base, that's one of the biggest disconnects and one of the biggest sources of disequilibrium for a teacher, right? Like when you go through an intensive professional development, like let's say letters, and you come out of your letters training, you're transformed, right? Your belief has transformed, but then you get back into your school, and they're like, "Here's your materials," and materials don't jive, or the school curriculum doesn't jive with what you've learned. So you've been empowered to change your belief system, but then your practice stalls that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
It comes to a head. Yeah. I'm thinking of one of my best friends from college who is, she and I went through our teacher prep program together for all of our undergrad, and still really good friends today. And she left teaching for a while to be a stay-at-home mom, and she came back this year, which what a year to come back. I mean,
wow. Yikes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, she is, obviously we're good friends. So I talk a lot about this stuff with her. And so she's transforming her practice through reading and learning and talking with me about a lot of this stuff in the science of reading. But in the county where she works, they've got no curriculum. The only curriculum that they've really truly adapted is like a very small sliver of a phonics curriculum, and everything else is just completely like cherry picked, self-created by that district. And she said it is so challenging because she knows what's right to do, but it's hard to actually execute it in a way that makes sense, in a way that's not, I mean, quite honestly, going to kill her for 23 hours of the day, to be doing all this stuff that she's gathered. I mean, how can it's just an impossible job to do when you don't have the materials or the professional learning that go along with it.
Exactly. And I think, and the support network. And, one of the things we're trying to do at the Reading League in that defining movement is engage all stakeholders, and to say, and because we are all stakeholders, right? Like, Joe, community member, he's a stakeholder in ensuring that the children in his community grow up to be literate citizens, to then contribute back to the community or become, thriving, employees in a business in that community. And, higher education, they're huge stakeholders in this.
Absolutely.
They're
one of the
huge.
things, I'd love to get your thought on this, Laura. Melissa and I were talking about the fact that higher ed doesn't really have, that we know of, some sort of connective tissue between, like, for example, the college that is up the street from me doesn't have a connection to the college that is in another state in terms of education. Like, if you went to, every state has different qualifications for their programming. And then also, we're kind of doing a disservice to teachers by having a million different like certification processes and like, I don't even know the words to say it because there's so much going on. Like, if I moved to Pennsylvania, I would have to get recertified in 3 different areas. If I moved to Texas, I might have to get, they might only accept 2 of my certifications, yet I have a collegiate degree from Maryland so.
And how many of them require science of reading at all?
Well, not many.
Yes.
Well, and if you look at the the IDA standards and look at the schools, College of Education that they have endorsed, it's a small list. Or if you look at the NCTQ report, it's a relatively small list. Although I will say the last NCTQ report said that there has been growth in that area, but it's very, very slow growth. And you pinpoint. There's no consistency from even within a state, right? The university,
right.
Much less within the nation. But then also even within the school itself. I had an interesting conversation with the dean of a college of ed of the university of which I will not name. But I asked her, how do you teach your teachers, teach your candidates about reading? And how do they learn about how children learn to read? And I will say she seemed puzzled by the question. So I tried to kind of reword it to get to the essence of what is the through line that all your students as teacher candidates are learning. And essentially, she said, every instructor, professor has the freedom to really instruct on whatever methodology or instructional approach that they believe is important, is valid. And and her justification for that was to say that, well, we just don't know. Our teacher candidates, when they get out of college, we don't know what kind of a school or program they're going to be involved in. So we just need to give them this broad smattering, dips into different instructional approaches and methodologies and materials, because we just don't know where they're going to go. So again, that idea of a through line, that idea of understanding how children learn to read is such a missing link, right? And of course, the through line of what is scientifically based.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It makes me think of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this reminds me, Laura, of something you said when we talked earlier about like the science seeming like cold and, intimidating versus teaching that feels organic and lovely. And we want it to just be, feel good with our kids and how those two things don't always, come together.
Yeah, I think there's an impression, and this is, of course, an impression. That science is a hard science doesn't really deal with a relational profession like teaching. Mm-hmm. And that, yes, teaching is more an emotional practice, and how do we continue to nurture our children? And so science kind of seems opposed to that. If I adopt the science of reading, does that mean I can't be creative? Mm-hmm. Does that mean I can't follow my intuition when I'm working with my children? And I think it's important that we bust that myth.
Absolutely.
The science of reading is about your knowledge, teacher. It's about your knowledge base, so that when you go to follow your intuition, your intuition is based on what you know about how children learn to read and what instruction needs to look like. I also think there's just misconception. So that's a misconception just in general, I think, about the science, and it's intimidating, right? And I've heard teachers say, well, I was never good at science.
That's right. Yes.
As if somehow that precludes them, Right. But I also think, there's a perception, not among everyone, of course, but a perception that the science of reading is all about phonics. Or it's all about it's just about the foundational skills, and it's all about drill and kill, and that somehow just giving kids explicit systematic instruction is going to drill and kill them. And of course, Anita Archer talks so eloquently about this, about the importance of explicit instruction for everybody. But I always just like to think about kids in general. Kids, they want to come to school to learn to read and write. They want to unlock the squiggly lines on the page. Mm-hmm. When we unveil, we open up that curtain and unveil the mystery of that, it's delightful for them. It's delightful. And kids who, go through the grades and then we're not unlocking that code for them, they become increasingly frustrated because that's what they want to be able to do. And I always say, you can't love what you can't do. Mm-hmm. So, building kids' love of reading has to involve teaching them how to read.
Yeah. I think the struggle in that is that there is an implication there when you bring the science part in, that there's a right way to do it and a quote wrong way to do it. And in my brain, as I'm talking with people outside of this podcast, I kind of liken it to like riding a bike. Like, really, there is only one way to learn how to do that. You can't learn how to ride a bike without the bike, without pedaling. I mean, there's a right way to learn how to do that. You can't ride backwards, right? You can't push the pedals backwards. But when we kind of take that same idea and we apply it to reading, like, there is a right and a wrong way. If I'm teaching you how to ride a bike and I want to be creative, I might have my little one ride on grass so that when they fall, but you, Laura, might know that your child is a little more stability, a better balance, and they're okay to ride on some concrete or the sidewalk. And Melissa might actually choose a different kind of bike that maybe doesn't have pedals at first and then gets pedals later, so that baby Elliot can begin to learn the practice of core strength and balance, and then learn how to ride and manipulate those pedals. So to me, like, those are the scaffolded elements that happen within the quote scientific practice of learning how to ride a bike. But there really is only one way at the end of the day to learn how to ride that bike. And it is like reading. I mean, this really is a scientific practice. We know we're wiring our brain, and it is hard to ask folks to relearn what they've already learned the wrong way. You know,
it's so true. I think, yeah. And you brought up so many good points. I mean, one of the things is when you think about the skills to ride a bike are the same. You know, you have to be able to balance, steer, pedal. You know, one book that I think should be mandatory reading for every teacher is Stanislaus Dehaan's How We Learn. You know, it's basically, you know, this is how the human being learns, and just understanding the process of learning. You know, we've talked a lot about the process of learning to read, but the process of learning, and, you know, how we need explicit instruction. We need practice. We need distributed practice. I think that's kind of maybe a missing link too. When we think about the science of learning to read, are we addressing reading as well as the science of learning? Right. So I think it's really the science of learning, the science of reading, and the art of teaching. You know, how do we bring all that together so that, again, it's all about empowering teachers. How do we empower teachers to have the knowledge around the science of learning, the knowledge around the science of reading, and how does she hone her craft? And what you said, you know, that's where the creativity, that's where the you know, the uniqueness of her can come in. And I just have to put a, you know, plug in for that too. You know, how do we become our best, most authentic selves so that we're bringing that chutzpah and humility, you know, into the classroom in a way that that authenticity of ourselves as humans in the classroom. That's where the relationship is built, and that's where the art of teaching, I think, really culminates.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to ask you to leave our listeners with a piece of advice.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. Well, again, you know, as a woman of a certain age, I have a lot of advice I'm willing to dispense. But
go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, you know,
give us your best piece.
yeah. This is where my kids would be rolling their eyes right now. But okay, so I think I'm going to give you two pieces of advice, and one is with my teacher hat on, and one is with my, you know, wise woman hat on. So
perfect.
Which I'm assuming that I'm going to wear, but doesn't mean I qualify. But I'm just going to go there. So you know, I think I really want teachers to know, you know, teaching is challenging. It takes stamina, patience, you know, fortitude, the relentless commitment to the students. And so my advice on that is to seek out support, seek out the support of others. You know, we're human. We need connection. We need community, and find those people, find those organizations that support you, who will lift you up, and who you can have those safe conversations in a risk-free, no judgment zone. You know, teaching, when I say risk-free, I think that's really important to help nurture our own, you know, chutzpah and humility. Teaching is about taking risks, and you need a soft place to fall, and you need a support network who will prop you up. And you also need a cheering section that's going to root you on. So find that community. And you know, I encourage people to join the Reading League. We are that community of support. The other advice I would give is, you know, give yourself some grace. Give yourself grace. I know teachers, we talked about this earlier, parents, children right now are being asked to do more than ever. We're being asked to be more adaptable than ever. You know, let's breathe. Let's remember that even when we feel like we've had a bad day or a bad lesson, every moment we spend connecting with a student is a moment connecting with another human being. And that little human being cherishes that connection. So give yourself grace, you know, give yourself permission to fail, give yourself the same grace you would give to those you love.
Yeah.
I like that.
Lovely.
We are so grateful that we are very grateful that you came and talked to us today. And I want to give you a quick moment to plug your podcast, as well as a quick question before we wrap. Dusty and Dot, what channel? Do you have a channel?
Oh, you know what? It's going to be through WCNY, which is Central New York, but I don't have any more information for you on that. I'm sorry.
No, we'll update as you do. Let me know.
Yes, I will.
I need
and
to
also,
find it for Elliot one day.
I know.
Yes. Oh my God, it'd be perfect. And yes, I'm sorry I don't have that right on the tip of my tongue here to give you. So, but check us out. Go down our website, www.thereadingleague.org. More updates will be available there. Follow us on social media. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. More information's available. And we're always delving into new arenas. Like I mentioned, the Defining Movement. That's its own separate website. I encourage people to go to that website, which is whatisthescienceofreading.org. Please join that movement. I also want to mention, please join the Reading League. There's no cost to be a member, and we want to be really nationwide, internationally strong. So join us, because there's power in community, and there's power in simply being in that safe space to explore and learn. We're always adding to our knowledge base. I really encourage people to check out the online academy that I shared. I think that's really important. So we've got a lot going on, and please follow us. And I did want to mention, yes, I'll give a shout out to my podcast.
Tell everybody.
Yeah. So it's called Teaching, Reading, and Learning, the TRL podcast. And you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. And it's just been the one of the greatest privileges of my life to be able to speak to David Kilpatrick, Louisa Moats, Emily Hanford, Tim Shanahan. I did an episode with Maria Murray and Doreen Cook from the Reading League, talking about the origins of the Reading League. And I actually had someone email me and say that, despite all the expertise of the people, the esteemed people that I had interviewed before, they loved that one because it showed them the power of a grassroots movement. And so Doreen and Maria talk about the Reading League as a grassroots movement.
Oh, that's great.
And then the one that's going to launch next, in a couple days here, is a woman named Jessica Pasek, and she is a teacher. She's a reading specialist. And so she's going to share, kind of her transformation story. And she'll also, because she's kind of boots on the ground, she's going to be able to talk about how important it is that we have community. And she's going to talk about what factors make a difference in a school's transformation story, and what sort of culture has to be in a school for that transformation to happen. So that's pretty exciting. And then I mentioned earlier that I have Parker Palmer, who is going to be launching soon. That's this spring. And also I have in the can, ready to go, Anita Archer.
Nice.
I know. And she is just she's a dynamo. I mean, what can I say? I mean, Anita Archer, people, hello.
It is so fun listening to podcasts, because I feel like when I'm done listening, I mean, I feel like I know you now, and because I've interviewed you, but when I just listen to podcasts while I'm running and stuff, I'm like, ooh, I feel like I know, like Maria and Pam Snow were interviewed on the Amplify podcast.
Yes, exactly.
I'm like, oh, let me go follow them on Twitter. Now I know them. It does feel like you have a window into, or a door into their life. Like, it's really amazing.
For sure.
Yeah. And I'm like you, I listen to a podcast when I'm walking or if I'm in the car. And so it seems like a very accessible way to get to know people. So I'm really excited about these conversations. I was really excited to come on with you today and have a conversation, because the more we're talking, the more we're getting the word out, the more we're supporting one another, the stronger this movement's going to be, and the more teachers and the more children will be impacted by it. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah,
thank you.
I just became a member of the Reading League while we were talking.
Why, thank you. I appreciate that multitasking moment, Melissa.
Good job. Well, thank you so much, Laura, and we will talk soon. Thank you again.
You bet.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.